What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for the Week 17 Thursday Night Football single game showdown slate between the Seattle Seahawks and the Chicago Bears. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. Single game $1 million winner. And if you didn't get enough football in the middle of the week on Wednesday, don't worry. We have another game tonight between the Seahawks and the Bears. In this video, I will break down the injuries that impact the slate, talk about core plays and low risk lineup construction tips, and then the same high risk strategies that I've been using to win some decent cash in these showdown contests over the past few weeks, the same strategies that you all have used throughout the season, and then give you some ideas and angles on how to specifically apply those angles for tonight's slate. So let's jump into it. Let's not waste any time. Bears and the Seahawks. We'll start with the visiting Seahawks. The biggest news, obviously, is Kenneth Walker is out, was dealing with that injury for a couple of weeks. Zach Charbonnet was the lead back. Walker returned last week and then actually had a high ankle sprain, completely different injury than the one he sustained that led him to miss those couple of games earlier in the season and then the past couple of weeks. So we know what's going to happen now. Zach Charbonnet is going to be the lead back in the 4 games that Kenneth Walker has missed this year. We look at the last 2 weeks. It was just 80% of the snaps for Zach Charbonnet, but in weeks 2 and 3, that number was 90%. So somewhere between 80 to 90% of the snaps for Zach Charbonnet. And fortunately for us, DraftKings and FanDuel priced Zach Charbonnet appropriately. I guess there was word that Kenneth Walker may have been hurt, and they didn't price Zach Charbonnet at like 6K or 5K or something. So relatively expensive if he would have been a complimentary running back, but 8,400 is extremely cheap for his role, and he'll be one of the most popular players on the slate as a result. On Chicago's side, no skill position players are out or injured, but they're missing their left tackle, Braxton Jones, a pretty nasty leg injury. He's going to be out. And they've played without Braxton Jones 3 times this season. And in those games, Caleb Williams averaged just 181 passing yards per game and just 1 combined passing touchdown over those 3 contests. So not great. Oh, and by the way, their left guard, Tevin Jenkins, is out. So left tackle and left guard are both out for Chicago, have to downgrade their offense and upgrade Seattle's defense as a result. So now let's talk about low-risk contests, 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads. Just have to beat half the field to double your money. Now, the pricing is pretty soft on both sides. Despite pricing up Charbonnet as if Walker was going to miss, we can fit in basically whoever we want on this slate. So for low-risk contests, and I've seen some questions in the comments over the past couple of videos about playing 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs. That is an approach that we try to implement whenever possible for low-risk contests only. 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads, where half the field doubles their money. For high-risk contests, we don't necessarily try to jam in that strategy. And even in some low-risk contests, as you'll see tonight here on DraftKings, it's not a strategy that we must do. The idea is we try to lock up all the scoring. If a touchdown is scored in the game, there's a good chance that it goes into our lineup if we play both quarterbacks and both running backs. So tonight, if we tried that approach, it would be Geno Smith, it would be Zach Charbonnet, it would be Caleb Williams, it would be DeAndre Swift, who's still handling majority of the workload for the Bears, and 5150 left per player. That's a good amount compared to some of the recent slates that we've seen on DraftKings. So we could play something like Seahawks defense. That leaves us 6K. Not really much there. We could play kicker defense. I guess that's possible. We could drop down and play Noah Fant, who will be a popular punt, 3,600. That still only leaves us 6,700. We could go Zach Charbonnet at captain, who may be the most popular captain on the slate because of his pricing and their favored status. Let's get Geno back in here. 7,200. Then we could play Roman Dunze. That's possible. So this is a very reasonable approach tonight. The biggest issue, however, is we're leaving out Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, if you haven't been following that closely, we know that the 2 quarterback, 2 running back approach, especially on DraftKings, it goes awry when we have a stud receiver who commands a lot of targets, a lot of PPR points. JSN has been that guy this year. Just completely consistent for the most part. 10, 15 plus points, 20, 30 point upside. But again, he is $10,200. It's not a slate where it's tough to fit him in, but I imagine a lot of low risk lineups will have him because of his projection on this slate. So what I think most people will do, or at least optimal lineups for low risk contests, will be not playing DeAndre Swift and instead playing Jackson Smith and Jigba. That still leaves 4,100 left per player. So you could still play Fant and a kicker. You could drop down a little further, Roshan Johnson or Kenny McIntosh. But this is probably the low-risk core on DraftKings tonight. And again, if you can't find something you like that fits here, you could swap out JSN for DeAndre Swift. It is an approach that we use pretty often, and it gives you a little bit of a more balanced lineup tonight. Now, FanDuel, the approach works even better because one, JSN is the most popular or the most expensive player on the slate, as FanDuel has been doing recently. And the running backs are extremely cheap. So we play Geno, we play Caleb, we drop down. Zach Charbonnet is just $11,000. DeAndre Swift is just $10,000. So a stark difference compared to DraftKings pricing. Let's get Zach Charbonnet in there, and that leaves 10,500. We could just play DJ Moore. We could play Seattle or Jason Myers. I mean, this is easily the optimal approach for tonight on FanDuel. It makes a low-risk contest a great target for tonight if you play on both sites or you only play on FanDuel. So as you can see, the pricing is extremely, extremely soft. Can fit in whoever we want. Generally, when we try 2 quarterbacks, 2 running back, or top receiver and 2 quarterbacks and 1 running back, it doesn't leave much salary left over. But 10,500 on DraftKings, 5,000 on FanDuel, 5,000 on DraftKings. Pricing is extremely soft tonight, which leads us into the high risk section where we have to beat a lot of people to win a lot of money, exponential payouts, and we start to employ a lot of the strategies that we lay out in our daily plug and in our captain spot showdown guide on our site. So when pricing is soft, we know that we can leave more salary on the table. So that's one angle for tonight. Lots of ways to leave salary, and whether that's playing cheaper captains, whether that is because the field is going to try to use as much salary as possible. We know that. But when the pricing is this soft, it allows you to drop down from a player who's just as good and maybe projected slightly worse and leaves more salary on the table, but a very real chance that they outscore the player above them. Just a very quick example. If you were building a lineup and the final spot into your lineup was DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, you pick one of these Chicago receivers maybe to pair with Caleb Williams, the field is going to play DJ Moore or Keenan Allen because they're the most expensive and they project better than Rome Odunze. But Rome Odunze, who's been an underperforming wide receiver multiple times this year for many reasons, he can easily outscore those guys. Not 60, 70, 80% of the time, but 20, 30% of the time. And you leave $3K of salary on the table, the field's not going to do that. A better example may be Metcalf versus Zach Charbonnet or Caleb versus DeAndre Swift, right? If you're building for a Seattle onslaught lineup and Caleb could fit into the last spot in your lineup, $9,600, but because of the offensive line injuries, you don't trust Caleb Williams tonight, you could drop down to DeAndre Swift for $2,000 cheaper, or Metcalf or Zach Charbonnet. So all I'm saying is, generally when we leave salary on the table, sometimes we're making a huge risk by dropping down to a much worse projected player. That's not necessarily the case tonight because we have so many guys and the pricing for both sides. Another strategy for tonight's high-risk contest. The field is going to build extremely, extremely, extremely Seattle heavy. 5-1 stacks, 4-2 stacks, 3-3 with Seattle captains. On FanDuel, 4-1 stacks, 3-2 stacks with Seattle MVPs. So a very easy way tonight to get different, and I think it's my favorite way, is to play balanced or Chicago heavy lineups. And that may be difficult because of Chicago's offensive line injuries. But if JSN can command all the targets or most of the production through the passing game, if Zach Charbonnet hogs some of the touchdowns or most of the touchdowns for Seattle, if Chicago's special teams or defense can outscore Seattle's kicker and defense, or if some of the Chicago punts. The issue with, and the reason why the field is building Seattle heavy for this slate is because, and I'll talk about this in a second with the punts or the lower priced players, most of the more viable options are on Seattle's side because Chicago has such a, and these teams are actually pretty predictable and pretty similar in the way they use their players, where Seattle mainly uses 3 wide receivers. Chicago mainly uses 3 wide receivers. They don't really get their 4th and 5th receivers involved. They play basically one tight end. A number 2 tight end comes in and plays 20 to 30% of the snaps, but doesn't command many targets. Their starting running back gets 70, 80% of the work. So it makes it difficult for a backup or a tertiary player to sneak into the optimal lineup because there's just not much opportunity for them. As a result, we get pretty condensed ownership on the guys who are cheaper but are playing, guys like Noah Fant and really just Noah Fant down here because everyone else is in that kind of rotational role outside of Tyler Lockett, but he hasn't been commanding many targets so far this year. So anyways, this is a long way of saying Chicago heavy or balanced lineups tonight will be extremely different, and just running our builder this morning, I don't think that's that outrageous of an outcome. So If you're not too into that strategy, you don't have to necessarily play 5 or 4 bears in a lineup, but just playing 3 bears in a lineup is a good balanced approach to where you get different enough in the field and it's not that outrageous of a game script, because you got to remember the spread in this game is only 4. Despite Chicago's offensive line injuries, despite the records between these two teams, betting markets are expecting this game to be relatively close, which means Chicago should have enough opportunities to keep the game competitive, unlike some of the games we've seen recently, unlike that Green Bay and Saints game on Monday night, which went exactly how we expected it to go, with Green Bay blowing them out. This game should be competitive, and as a result, have plenty of opportunities for Chicago players to make the optimal lineup. Another approach for tonight is playing low-owned captains. Really like this approach tonight as well, because the field is going to condense on Jackson Smith and Jigba, Geno Smith, and Zach Charbonnet particularly, DJ Moore for Chicago, and then probably Caleb Williams as well. And on FanDuel, it's just going to be maybe 70%, if not more, Geno Smith and Caleb Williams. So by not playing those guys, you get a really big leverage spot on the field. And because, like I said, because these teams are so predictable, it's not like we're going to have a bunch of low-owned players that are very viable. Some slates, we have teams that mix up the usage, or we have some injury news, or we have just some uncertain rotations, and that is where we can truly capitalize. That's not necessarily the case for tonight for Seattle. Even though Chicago's out of the playoff hunt, we expect them to continue to play basically how they have been playing. Maybe next week they switch it up and rest some veterans? Probably not. Seattle's firmly in the playoff hunt, so they're going to continue to play the same way they've been playing. So when teams are very predictable and we have no uncertainty in terms of usage, it makes it difficult to play a lot of low-owned players. So on slates like that, we have to play low-owned captains as a result, because we still have really good players, but we just need them to get a ceiling outcome more than what the field is playing these other guys. So the field is playing JSN, they're playing Geno, they're playing Charbonnet. Instead, we could play DK Metcalf. We could play Keenan Allen. We could play Rome Odunze. We could play DeAndre Swift. We could play Cole Kmet even at the very bottom. Or even Noah Fant at captain. Even though he'll be popular, not many will play him at the captain. But again, because of the soft pricing, I don't necessarily think playing a mid-range or cheaper captain is the route to go tonight. We've seen that on some recent slates. In fact, again, my Isaiah Likely win last Saturday. I had a win yesterday with a mid-range captain. I don't necessarily think that's the slate, or this is the slate to do it tonight, because of how cheap and how soft the pricing is. So stick to the guys 6K or higher, 7K or higher on DraftKings, and just play the lower owned versions, unless you can find lower owned plays that you like. I'll talk about the cheaper players here in a second who will be low owned. But again, pivoting from Smith and Jigba, DJ Moore, Caleb, Geno, and Charbonnet to either Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, DeAndre Swift, Rome Odunze, that's the easier pivot, is at the captain spot tonight. And again, on FanDuel, if the field is going to heavily play Geno Smith, Caleb Williams, that means we could play Zach Charbonnet. We could play JSN over here, DJ Moore, the receivers. So I think we basically every slate we get some kind of question about the weather. There is some rain in the forecast tonight, not enough to be impactful. Some light rain, some light wind, nothing to where we're expecting it to pull off the charts, where we can play defenses heavy or the total is expected to go super low. So play it as you normally would. The weather shouldn't be an impact unless that forecast dramatically changes over the next 8 hours or so. All right, so then we talked about captains and MVPs. We talked about salary usage. We talked about how many players per team to use for high-risk contests. And let's just run through the cheaper players to see if we can get any edges here. So I'm talking about players that are below the kickers and the defenses. So Noah Fant running tons of routes. He will be popular. In fact, he'll be the most popular punt below 4K on DraftKings. Tyler Lockett, still running 70-80% of the routes for Seattle, but has 4 combined targets over the last 3 games, just not being used. Geno's locked into JSN, throwing the DK Metcalf. Lockett has reached that point in his career where he's just not being targeted when he's on the field. But again, showdown slate, when a guy is on the field, we have to consider him. So if a guy's on the field for 70% of the plays, just hope and pray he gets a couple targets. And we know Lockett is talented. All we need is one shot for him to pay off his price tag at $3,200. A.J. Barner, and again, after Noah Fant, not many of these guys will be that popular. Barner, playing 30-40% of the routes, getting a couple targets per game, has seemed to be a talented guy. He is priced up at 3K, though, which makes it a little tougher for him to get into the optimal lineup with just 1 or 2 targets. Next, we have the running back twos, Roshan Johnson and Kenny McIntosh. Travis Homer is out for the Bears tonight. Roshan will keep the role he had earlier in the season as the passing down back, mix in some goal line, relieve DeAndre Swift when he needs a break. So Roshan Johnson, one of the better floor plays, I would say, at least guaranteed to get you a couple of points here. And if he can somehow get into the end zone, he would have a great chance at making the optimal lineup. Same for Kenny McIntosh. Now, we expect Charbonnet to handle a vast majority of the workload here, but McIntosh got a few touches when Kenneth Walker has been out this year. Got the 2 targets in Week 14 in a game where Seattle was winning most of that game. So McIntosh, probably not as many touches in terms of projection as Roshan Johnson, but touches nonetheless at $2,400, so we can consider him in our lineups as well. It's a good question whether or not we want to consider him in Zach Charbonnet lineups, but I think McIntosh is cheap enough that if he gets a few points, there's a chance he could still be optimal, and Zach Charbonnet is the optimal captain or flex play. So I think I wouldn't decline any lineups that have both Charbonnet and McIntosh in it. Would I outright target those types of lineups? Probably not, but I would allow it if I'm building 20 or 150 plus lineups. Next, we have Jake Bobo, $2,000, wide receiver 4. Both these teams don't use their wide receiver 4s very often. We're looking at Jake Bobo, 25% of the snaps, which is a decent amount for a wide receiver 4 and someone in this price range. I think we can safely project 1, maybe 2 targets. So again, 1 to 2 targets is about the expectation for most of these guys down here. Bobo in play if you need a 5% guy. Again, we don't really need guys in this salary range unless we jam all the top guys. So, but if you do, Bobo, 25% of the snaps, could do worse. Pharaoh Brown, 20% of the snaps as a tight end 3, basically. Maybe 1 target. Not really that viable outside of the largest contest. Gerald Everett has 1 target since week 9. Not really viable outside of 150 lineups in the biggest contest. Colin Johnson is a touch interesting because he has 2 targets in the last 3 weeks. Absolute stud in the preseason. And if there is a slight chance that Chicago, they're out of the playoff hunt, they don't want to get Keenan and DJ Moore a million reps. They still want to get Rome Odunze reps. But if there's a chance they just take a step back, 5-10% of the routes for Keenan and DJ Moore in a lost season, do they get Colin Johnson some more reps to see what he has, to see if he's in their 2025 plans? I think it's possible. So, again, that's a 1% play for the largest GPPs for 20-plus lineups, but certainly an option. Again, probably at most can project him for 1 target, but if we're looking for some sort of usage abnormality, Colin Johnson will be the guy that benefit the most of anybody in this range down here based on where these 2 teams are in their respective seasons. All right, that'll do it for this video. One final thought. So, crazy schedule this week. I'm telling you, really it's about me and our content team doing content on Christmas Eve, making lineups on Christmas, the day after Christmas. We have 3 games on Saturday. For some reason, I don't know. 3 games on Saturday. Jack and I will post a video probably some point tomorrow, Friday. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel to get notified when that goes live. We obviously have the main slate on Sunday. We have Sunday Night Football. We have Monday Night Football. The video will be for main slate and Monday night. And again, for Saturday as well. Daily plugs for all of those slates on OccupyFantasy.com, Occupy model, and ownership for all of those slates. So if you want that extra edge, OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get all of your Showdown NFL information. Golf starts next week. Yeah, just when we get a little tiny break, we're right back in the swing of things. So OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get all of your DFS needs. Any questions about tonight's slate, go ahead and comment on the video. I will answer them before 8:15 p.m. Eastern. And Discord is the best way to chat with other members of our community, ask questions to the staff, and sweat out the games with us. Link is in the description if you're interested in joining. So Brian from Occupy, thank you for listening. Merry post-Christmas, almost Happy New Year's. Very crazy schedule for the NFL. Try to enjoy all the games. We're here right along with you for all of them. So good luck and enjoy tonight's game.